So this is a project that's been underway for several years. It's a team of volunteers from around the world, including from the countries of Belgium, New Zealand, where else do we come from? Canada, the UK, and Austria. Yes, so it's a pretty diverse team, which of course helps us also methodologically when we're looking at quite diverse aspects of industrial relations. So as the title suggests, we want to try and expand and look at a model of industrial relations systems that includes Europe, but also goes beyond. So we'll briefly overview the rationale for this study, which I think is long needed, and it draws on and develops and extends the Eurofound's normative model, which looks at industrial relations systems and their actual health, if you like, at a national level. And we'll talk a little bit about our methodology, the variables that we're using and how we've extended those, and also the countries, which obviously are within Europe and beyond, before giving you a very whistle-stop tour of our preliminary findings and our next bit of research that we're hoping to do around collective bargaining. Okay, so thinking about, and I don't want to rehearse this too much because it'll be familiar to some of you, but why would we look at a global analysis of IR? Well, we found that the EU level studies are useful in their own right, but they focus and tend to be Eurocentric, of course, and they also tend to be quite normative to that context. So there's actually very little comparative analysis or indeed analysis in other regions of the world, which looks at industrial relations systems as a whole and their various elements. So we want to be able to have a basis for broader comparison. And this is, of course, driven by globalization features such as transnational capital expansion, labor migration, and the intertwining of our industrial relations systems, for example, through labor migration. And also, of course, there's growing diversity in each of the national labor markets, which we're trying to capture with such a model. So we think that the potential contributions that can come about from this is to look at and bring in new measures of industrial relations systems health and importance, and to do that in a wider country context, and to also think about how we can provide a more useful tool that extends to the social partners and others in Europe and beyond. And I think on that note, is this still me or you? Still me, okay. So this is, I thought I was getting off lightly then. So this is the Eurofound's normative model, which may be familiar to a number of you. If you look at Eurofound's work, it's one of their flagship endeavors. And they've been trying to map 4 key dimensions of industrial relations systems. And those are around social justice, quality of work and employment, industrial competitiveness, and there in the center, linking all of those as well, is industrial democracy. So these are the big hit points, if you like, that we see in industrial and other policies as well in various EU member state policy endeavors. And we've got there, I won't go through them, but we've got brief definitions that the Eurofound use for those key dimensions. Okay. The Eurofound, of course, don't rest on their laurels, and they have been finessing their own work, and that has included bringing in more variables to try and provide a more refined analysis across the EU member states with which to analyze national industrial relations systems. And we can see that they have a number of publications, and I'll just draw your attention to one in 2020 by Miguel et al., where they focus more on the industrial democracy dimension, which indeed is something of a linchpin in their model. They also put out a very recent piece of work in 2023 where they re-examine their model, the variables and the dimensions they used, and push that on to another level. So we're building on the progress of the latter study. Okay. Obviously, there are a number of factors to consider about what you put in and what you leave out of an analysis development like this. And the EU member states tend to have a number of comprehensive data points because they have a number of comprehensive data sources. So, you know, they're covering off things quite easily, whereas in the Pacific, for example, it's very sketchy, if indeed it's collected at all. And so this has been one of the big challenges for the study, to try and bring in different sources of information that's comparable, but may also not just be quantitative, but qualitative in character. We also think that a number of the indicators that have been used to date are quite blunt in their measurements, so we're trying to develop that and finesse that through a mixed methodology. And also, we're taking and we acknowledge quite an exploratory stance. We're not weighting our variables yet. We're simply finding out what variables we want to amass and utilize. So that's obviously something we can think about for subsequent work. Okay. Still me. So extending Eurofound's methodology, and I think that actually undersells what we're trying to do a little bit because this is developing into a fresh model in a sense. So initially we were thinking about extending their roadmap, and we now have a country analysis which extends to 45 nations around the globe. And we're also bringing in all of the OECD data set to look for additional variables that might have been missed or which could have some prominence in trying to define industrial relations systems. And what this has led us to is developing upon the 4 dimensions of the Eurofound model, and we've actually turned it into 6 because we like to complicate matters. So I think at that point, it might be over to you.
Yes, so as Jane said, this is very much work in progress, but here you can see basically you have a visual, on the kind of clustering of countries we have been considering. Now, what is important here perhaps to highlight is that although we have different regions across the globe, but still the European one seems to play an important role. In the sense that we have 26 countries, including the UK, which are part of the clustering here and part of the European cluster. Now, of course, our aim would be also to think to how to include other countries, and we are still working on this kind of issue. But for the moment, this is how it looks like. So what is in here? Here you have the kind of dimensions that we have been looking at and variables for the selection from the OECD data set. A couple of things to be said here. So what we present here are just some example of the indicators that we have been selecting, also for the kind of analysis we are undertaking now, but also the analysis that we aim to undertake in the future. The selection we have done is based basically on the relevance and the availability for the greatest number of countries possible. We are exploring, of course, at the moment, other data sets in order to expand, as I said before, the kind of number of variables, especially on the industrial relations side. As you might guess, this is what we are mainly interested in. So, and now I want to turn to this kind of figure. I think probably I will jump first on these. So these are just preliminary results. Don't ask me. Hi, Jay. We wish we could have had Bernd and Patrice here in the room to as our also statistical expert on these kind of issues. But what we can say here, these are just preliminary results. As I said, you can see some sort of patterns across the different dimensions. Across how does it work across the different regions? There are some convergences, for example, inflation, but there are also divergences. For example, labor market characteristics, which is quite interesting to have a look at. Now, just to move on up. No, that's wait. Yes, that's another chart which goes a bit more in details, but is similar to what was the previous one. So also here you can see some kind of patterns across the different regions, again with some similarities and some dissimilarities across the regions. And what is in here? I go back. So this is something crazy, but here you see basically the kind of sub dimensions that we selected within each dimension. So, and what this tells us is still, I think, ongoing for investigation. But I think, the most important charts are the previous 2 ones that I referred to. So let's move on. So, of course, what we can conclude here is that we aim to do some kind of additional quantitative and also, qualitative analysis by bringing new indicators. Why do we want to do this? Is because we think that this would help to assess and account for the industrial relations health. And how does it look like in all these kind of countries and regions around the world? Current models are a good starting point, that's what we think, but there is also scope for much development and input of a wider range of stakeholders in order to achieve all these. The importance and benefits of establishing an empirical driven model of international industrial relations, that's what we want to do in this exercise, as also Jane addressed, especially is, we think, especially important in the context of continuous and intricate movements of capital and labor across different nations. And we see some benefits, and also we see some kind of advantage and disadvantage of creating such a sort of model, which certainly is valuable, but also, you know, as you could see, raises a lot of difficult and challenging. And I want to point here out two main challenges we had. The first one regarding the significance, building significance or worth of developing an empirically driven model for international industrial relations. Still, we are engaged in this exercise, but it's very difficult because of the complexities of the global movement, again, of capital and labor that we see, and this is also very much reflected in the different dimensions. And also, we face the considerable difficulties and challenges which are associated with the actual process of creating this model despite the kind of apparent value. So this suggests that basically, although there is a clear sort of understanding of the benefits, the complexities are quite existent. And in the next step, we are at the moment trying to identify groups of countries around the world that are characterized by, again, similar or different collective bargaining system. As Jen said, we are at the moment working around these. And we want to do it for two specific reasons. Zooming on collective bargaining, we think is very important because the previous literature, particularly in industrial relations, has been focusing, and here I talk from a Western also kind of countries, European perspective, has been actually focusing on other dimension, and particularly, you know, there is a lack of including other countries in this analysis on collective bargaining. We want also to include other countries, for example, India, China, Brazil, Argentina, Indonesia, to try to make sense of how does it work in terms of collective bargaining structures in these kind of countries. And this is something that we see is lacking. And secondly, we think that an analysis around collective bargaining would also perhaps allow us to argument or challenge previous classifications, such as, for example, the varieties of capitalism approach. Now, we know there is a lot of criticism around the varieties of capitalism approach. We don't want to build complexities on the typologies of around the varieties of capitalism approach, but we actually think that, you know, this could be an interesting exercise also to kind of broaden up globally and so forth. And that's it. Thank you.